How are your leaders approaching the new financial year? Are they taking a hit and hope approach, a bit like I play pool? Or do they have a carefully considered plan with clear line of sight back to organisational strategy? I'm Lee Griffith, a communications strategist, executive coach and all-round champion of leaders who shun the old school stereotypes. I'm here to help you get clear on your strategy, implement some self-leadership and connect with those you serve through your communications. If you want to focus on the impact you're having as a leader, book in for a free consultation call with me, where we'll explore how you can fine-tune your performance in order to deliver improved organisational results. Visit sundyskies.com for details. In this episode, I'm exploring the challenges organisations can face when leaders can't align personal and organisational priorities. I share the reasons why the annual planning process can feel like Groundhog Day. I discuss the problems caused by poor personal planning and what this means for your different stakeholders. And I share the free foundations all leaders need to have in place to deliver with the right impact. Enjoy. Today, I want to talk about how leaders plan for their year ahead. You might be saying, it's April, why are we talking about this now, Lee? But a lot of organisations in the UK at least, especially in the public sector where I do a lot of work, have financial years that run from April to March. So we're starting a new financial year. It's a new operational year, new year for appraisals, training cycles, PDPs, all that jazz. It's a big old reset for an organisation. And I'm going to be honest with you, I quite like the fact that this happens in April. Firstly, who wants to be doing end of year accounts and new year planning in the run up to Christmas? You could only imagine the state of organisational plans once someone's had a few baby shams at the works party. Although I bet you those plans would be way more fun. But who wants to juggle returns with gift wrapping? And sorry, for those whose reality that actually is, I do apologise and I do feel for you. Secondly, I see January and March as like the warm-up act for the year. We test a few of those intentions, New Year's resolutions, whatever you call. See what lands, see what doesn't land. We fully embrace hibernation mode as winter takes hold. And then we emerge with the spring blooms in April, ready to take on the year. One of the things I've noticed over the years when I've worked in corporate and now talking to clients and friends and family, we get to this new financial year and suddenly go, oh, what are we going to do? Let's be honest, the planning cycle is usually an arse ache, excuse my French. It's like a weird game of Monopoly where you don't have the rules, the bank is a bit hit and miss, and you're just randomly throwing the dice hoping that you hit the right number. Now, technically, it shouldn't be so hard because most organisations have spent loads of time and loads of energy developing an organisational strategy. That's the document that's going to transform your organisation over the next 2, 3, 5 years. In theory, your annual plan is a year's delivery of that strategy at whatever stage of it you're in. But then organisations don't take into account the left field guidance or the changes to the external operating environment that has very little regard or knowledge of your strategy. They don't think of the internal shifts that have been happening over the past year, past 2 years, which your strategy perhaps needs to reflect on and adapt to. And the third issue is the senior leadership team not having the time, the space, or sometimes the skills to translate the strategy into meaningful action. This is one of the big mistakes I see at this time of the year, and it's why I want to tackle it in this episode. Because whilst directors say they have clarity around organisational strategy, maybe there's a plan on the page that's gone up around the organisation. Every toilet door's got it. Perhaps there's the headlines or strap lines that are trotted out in all central communications and people can recite it whenever they're called upon to do. You might have all of that in place, but then what you find is there's normally a lack of clarity in the detail that sits beneath it. That translation of strategy into delivery through the lens of individual director contributions. And so often this is because individual directors don't have a clear vision for themselves around what their teams need to do to deliver organisational strategy, and they struggle to connect back with the wider objectives and targets. And instead, they focus their annual plans around personal projects or priorities, which thematically might link to the organisational strategy, but in the main, they don't really align and they're not pushing the organisation at the pace that's required. And this causes big problems for organisations, which I see time and time again. So directors, and by default their teams, become overloaded with priorities, with pet projects competing with organisational demands, instead of providing clarity and providing a laser-like focus on the few things that can be done well and will deliver the big ask. You find that they don't have the resources that they're going to need to deliver that ask because they haven't properly considered and costed the work. And so it's too late down the line before they realise that a key priority isn't going to be delivered on time or budget because it's never been worked through. And confusion starts to appear because as leaders, they can't clearly and confidently communicate and manage people's expectations for the year ahead. What you find is with a culmination of these problems, a knock-on effect is created, which makes it much harder to recover from. If we think about it from different stakeholders' point of view, if your executive team or individuals within it don't have that clarity to connect their priorities with organisational strategy, then the board isn't going to be bought in, or they're not going to understand how the big organisational priorities are being met, which leads to challenging conversations, extra scrutiny, and a whole load more work to satisfy them. That instantly increases the pressure felt from chief exec downwards and can create quite a hostile environment in formal and informal board meetings. You've then got the team or the teams who report into that or those directors. They aren't going to be aligned in the actions that they should be taking. And you'll find that they're either focusing on the wrong things or feeling overwhelmed with too many confusing and conflicting demands. That builds resentment. It erodes trust in the executive team, and it has a ripple effect down into the organisation as they pass that pressure and pain on. If you look at it from a system partner's point of view, particularly in sectors where you need to work collaboratively with neighbouring or complementary organisations because you've got common aims and goals to serve a particular group or population of people, these partners will feel frustrated that work isn't joined up and that your organisation isn't committed or focused enough. And that means you as an organisation might get extra scrutiny or less support for the things that you need them for. And then as a peer group, if execs aren't clear in their personal vision and strategy and can't align it with organisational direction, then as an exec team, it's really hard to do that peer challenge, hold each other to account. You start to get me thinking instead of team thinking, especially when it comes to self-preservation with the board who are being more challenging of you all. I had a conversation recently with a new director who I'm going to call Dave for the purposes of this podcast anyway. Dave felt he was failing in his role because he was struggling to get the board off his back about what was being done this year to improve performance and move them as an organisation into the top percentile, which was a big strategic goal for them all. Dave also felt like he couldn't rely on his team. They weren't delivering and he was having to do lots of hand-holding instead of focusing on the big issues that only he could sort out, which, ironically, if he was able to do, would eventually help move the dial. So internal pressures from the board, chaos and confusion amongst the team, a lack of support from the rest of the exec. He was feeling it from all sides, to the extent that Dave was even taking all this pressure home with him. He was working late into the evening, missing spending time with his family, not sleeping because the to-do list was ever present and he was waking up with things that he had to do, emails he had to send. which then didn't create the right conditions when he got back into work the next day. Tired, irritated, frustrated. You see where I'm going with this? In the conversations I have with leaders around delivering organisational priorities, they'll often admit to not having a clear personal plan. Technically, yes, they've submitted something that looks like a plan, but is probably as useful as an inflatable dartboard because they haven't got the foundations in place. They don't have a clear vision or strategy for their area or areas of responsibility, which is aligned to delivering organisational strategy. They don't have the right conditions of self-leadership in place, so they don't know what or how to manage themselves. And they haven't had the right conversations with colleagues and partners, and so don't understand the interdependencies at play and how that will impact on things. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that as execs, they have one job to do, which is to strategically lead the organisation, and they're being paid big bucks to do that. So how on earth do we get into this annual planning malarkey and that goes so wrong for organisations, and how do they repeat these issues year on year? But actually, it's quite easy to see how this can happen. So think about it. How many directors that you know have been appointed primarily for their expert knowledge and skills? Yeah, they're great at finance, HR, operations, whatever it might be. They've come up through that professional route with a very narrow focus, and, that has absolutely allowed them to fly. They've been promoted because of those specialist knowledge and skills that they have. But it doesn't necessarily prepare them to represent a whole organisation, which suddenly opens up like an umbrella. You've probably heard me say before, definitely if you listen to the How to Take the Lead podcast, that exec recruitment still seems to value the specialist over the generalist. There's very few who test how someone is going to represent an organisation if they can translate organisational strategy, for example. I've been on stakeholder panels before recruiting execs, and people have struggled with questions around how they'll take people with them. And yet they've still been hired because their specialist knowledge was exemplary. And I'm not going to tell you how those situations ended up, nor will I start a conversation here about this being the reason why the same old faces are recruited time and time again. That isn't the time or place. That might be another episode. And then we have my bugbear of the so-called soft skills. And I have to say it like that because I resent and detest that phrase, but I can't think of a suitable alternative that doesn't sound like corporate BS. But I'm talking about relationship building, communications, empathy, influence, being able to earn trust and build connection to mobilise hundreds, if not thousands of people. It's not something you get taught in director induction. I mean, is there even a thing as director induction, or do people just do a whole load of meet and greets? Again, another topic perhaps. It's really vulnerable for someone to admit that they don't know how to do this stuff, especially when the weight of expectation is on new directors like Dave. And so these issues never really get tackled. They never learn the people skills. They're allowed to maintain more of a specialist focus instead of representing the organisation as a whole. That gets dumped with strategy with the chief exec. And it becomes this vicious cycle where new directors become the old hats who have to show the way for others who join the team. But what are they actually teaching them? Bad practice perpetuates. Organisations need to look at how they're supporting and onboarding new execs and leaders through the lens of delivering their vision and strategy. But leaders need to take personal responsibility as well. And I would say in summary, you always need to be reflecting, am I clear and providing clarity to others on how my personal strategy is delivering organisational priorities? Have I created the right conditions to lead well? And is my communications and engagement approach a helping or hindering hand at what I'm trying to achieve? These are the 3 foundations to impactful leadership and will make the difference between success and failure. And without these foundations in place, it's really hard for leaders to take organisational priorities and strategy and translate it, to take their teams with them, to understand how to focus on the things that matter most instead of the pet projects. I'm pleased to report that Dave did the work. He booked a one-to-one intensive strategy day with me and followed up with some coaching. And bringing awareness to the challenges he was facing, he started to get this fresh clarity around his priorities, new messaging to communicate those with his board and his team, and a plan of action he could take forward that would enable him to show up at work and home in a way that didn't compromise who he was. I've spoken to many leaders who feel stuck in situations like Dave's. And as I say, at this time of year, it can feel particularly hard to do that reset if the pressure is on to deliver plans when you can't see the wood from the trees. If it's something you're seeing as a problem in your organisation, let's have a chat about how I can support you. Visit sundayskies.com to get in touch. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and let me know what you thought on LinkedIn. You can find me at Lee Griffith. I'll be back with the next episode in 2 weeks' time, so in the meantime, sign up to my newsletter at sundayskies.com for monthly insights on how else you can lead with impact. Until next time.